Hi everyone, welcome
Hi.
back for this week's Facebook Live. You're back with ADW TV and we are continuing our series of how to book a destination wedding.
Right. So today is step 2, which is choosing a location.
Yay!
So this is probably like one of the biggest steps, honestly, other than budget. So that's why we've kind of done this as step 2. So there's a number of factors to consider when you're wanting to choose your location. Some people are going to have different priorities than others, but what we've done is kind of had 6 different factors here that probably at some point you're going to think about when choosing that location.
We have about 6 things to consider, so
Yeah.
whether you take certain ones first or second, like she said, everyone has different priorities.
Everyone's priorities will be different, but what we're going to start with is probably what we think almost everyone puts as number 1, and that is setting the budget.
Okay, so I know in our last video we talked all about budget and we divided it up between wedding budget and we also did travel budget. So this is where you're going to take that travel budget and that's what you're going to use right now.
Yeah, and again, one of the reasons that is probably most people's main priority is, you've got guests coming and everybody's concerned that, you don't want your guests to go crazy. Like a lot of people think, you know what, I'm going to be I don't want my guests to go crazy, so I'm going to set a budget at this amount. So always keep that in mind. So that's number 1, I think, for us. And you also want to be realistic too when you set that budget when you pull that out.
So if you have a budget of $1,500, you might not be looking at places like Aruba or Costa Rica or Barbados or St. Lucia. You at that point you want to stick to the big 3, which we call Cuba, Dominican, and Mexico.
Right. But you know what? If you've got a budget of $2,500, then you know what? You could probably open that up to many other locations.
Yeah.
But for sure, that's kind of one main factor when choosing the location is the budget, because again, that's really going to determine the options available.
That's correct. So second one is legal versus symbolic.
Yes. So I guess the biggest thing for me is, one of the questions I ask is, do you want a legal wedding? Basically, the 2 differences is legal and symbolic, which really legal is documentation requirements versus no documentation. So if you're wanting a legal wedding, then there's going to be locations that are going to be easier or less paperwork in advance to do that. And if you're looking for something a little bit more simple, you're maybe going to want to consider those. So those locations usually are going to be the English-speaking islands, so Jamaica, St. Lucia. Even if neither of you have been married before, it's pretty easy, like Cuba. Even Mexico, honestly, is easy documentation-wise. The biggest thing with Mexico that kind of sometimes scares people off is the blood work.
Yeah, let's talk about that blood work, because like you said, it does just hearing blood work, people get a bit scared. So
yeah, well, really, it's not difficult. So we set up an appointment with your on-site coordinator. The doctor will come to the resort. It's normally the day after that you arrive to do the blood work. It's literally 5 minutes, so it's not difficult at all. Cost, you do pay for that blood work, and it's usually between $200 to $300 in cash to the doctor. But really, it's simple and quick. So it's not, if you're not, I'm a little afraid of needles, so I can understand some people's being a little bit, being a little bit leery. But really, it is simple, quick, and it's simple to do a legal wedding there too.
And that's just for Mexico as a blood work, right?
Just for Mexico. Other locations, you don't necessarily need the blood work. Now, there are locations for legal weddings that do have a lot more involved, so a lot of documentation. So if you're choosing, like if your heart is set on Dominican Republic, for instance, just know and keep in mind that if you want the legal wedding there, there's a lot more prep work and a lot more expenses that go into getting those documents ready. The other option, with the symbolic is that really symbolic, you can then choose anywhere. You're not limited to the locations that you look at.
Yeah, and unless you tell people, I think we've mentioned this before, unless you're telling people that it's a symbolic wedding, they don't really know. You still sign something. It's a certificate. So it kind of still looks like it's a legal wedding. And then it also gives you that opportunity to do it in town for a cheaper rate. And then you can make that another opportunity where like the grandparents
sometimes exactly. A lot of times, sometimes if there's people in the group, like older relatives or whatever, that can't travel, we've had couples that will do just like a little backyard thing at their house with grandma and grandpa and an officiant, do the legal paperwork there, and then again go off and get married. So so again, just recapping legal versus symbolic, things to consider. Do you want legal? And if you want legal, do you want simple, or are you okay with documentation? And if if those are limited, then Symbolic, again, open to anywhere.
Yeah, perfect. So
yeah.
The next thing to consider is time of year, and that can really change anything.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So time of year, biggest things to consider are low seasons and high seasons. For sure, what we're going to talk about or just touch briefly on is hurricane season, because everyone asks about hurricane season. And hurricane season traditionally is kind of your summer and early fall dates. Most active dates for hurricanes or most active months usually are like September, October-ish. So there's pros and cons to both. So with that, obviously you're going to have a little bit better pricing, and maybe you can do one of those destinations that might be out of budget normally at a different time of year. So that's kind of one of the good things. If you're worried about it though, like let's say your date is not flexible, let's say you have to get married in September, or you want to get married because that's a special anniversary date, then one thing to consider is if you're worried about hurricanes, maybe look at something that's not in that traditional hurricane path. Yeah. So that would be places like South Caribbean, so like Aruba, Barbados, even Pacific coast of Mexico like Puerto Vallarta are options that it could happen hurricanes
more
in those
rainy,
areas, but
maybe more rainy versus anything else.
But really not very often are they hit. It's kind of more traditional, Jamaica, Cuba, Dominican, that kind of thing that is really affected.
So on the flip side, we're going to talk about also, so time of year you want to look at all the high seasons.
Right.
So that is our typical winter.
Right.
And also with the holidays that fall there, which would be Christmas and New Year's and also March break, or possibly even Easter.
Yeah. So, thinking about that, you might need some flexibility just because a lot of times people will come to us and say, you know what, we want March break because the kids are going to be out of school, or we want New Year's because everybody's going to be off work. So absolutely, those are great times of the year to consider. Just as that slide said, maybe consider some flexibility, or just make sure that that will affect your budget.
So have realistic ideas or expectations that it might be slightly higher than normal.
Right. However, if it doesn't necessarily have to be a holiday date, but you do want winter dates, then options that you can consider for winter months anyway, January would be one of your more affordable options. And again, kind of mid-April would be the affordable winter months. If it doesn't have to be winter, if you're totally flexible on dates, then, we found, like, what do we have for next year?
I think we have 7 weddings next year for May already.
May. So yeah, for next year anyway, May happens to be a really popular month with incredible rates for really, really good hotels. So May, November, and usually early December would be the 3 months that would be really great months. They're kind of in between that low and high season, so you're not really worrying about hurricane season, but not really the busyness of the winter either. So really definitely good value.
Okay, so next we have flight schedules. So it will be really easy if you have everyone, or at least a large majority of your people coming from one location, like Toronto, like that airport, but it gets a bit more complicated if you have a larger group coming from somewhere else. So whether it be Vancouver or Calgary, or even across the globe somewhere like Australia. So that's where we really need to investigate those flight schedules.
Right. So basically with those flight schedules, what I would tend to say to people is, if you have a large group of people coming from a secondary location, try and narrow your choices down based on those flight schedules. So for instance, let's say Toronto, and then let's say you have 12 or 14 relatives that all live in Vancouver. So what I would do is try and narrow your choices to locations that you can get flights from on Toronto and Vancouver options. There's always going to be other people randomly coming from different places around the globe, and we can always deal with them as an individual basis, which is not difficult.
Yeah, I know.
But for sure, you would want to set your main goal, keeping in mind those 2 big demographic areas. One thing to keep in mind is when you're looking at different cities, for instance, like Vancouver, Calgary, Halifax, something that's not in that Toronto area, we're very lucky for Toronto. We can get flight schedules pretty much anywhere all year round. But from those other coastlines, basically, charter schedules change a lot come summer season. So summer season is that May.
And even for the places you would think that would be popular, like Jamaica or Punta Cana.
Yeah, like come May, no direct flights any longer. So we can still get people there and accommodate them. but it's usually doing separate flights, separate accommodations. So
or a different day because they only go once a week or something like that.
So a lot of times, if that's the case, that you're looking, wanting to accommodate them, and let's say May was your original date, we might actually say, hey, do you want to bump it back to April? Because at that point, we can get flights from everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just something to keep in mind. Next on our list is resort amenities.
So in the last video, we told you to create a must-have list. So this is where you will take that must-have list, and you will read it. So hopefully,
grab it right now if you have it. Grab that list. Yeah.
So on there, you should have hopefully maybe a couple resort amenities on your priority list. So you're going to see what's on your priority list, and if any resort amenities are on there, that's what you will be looking at right now.
Yeah.
So first, we want to actually look at the group size you're hoping to have. So we're able to make sure that we can accommodate them on the resort.
Yeah. So basically, if you have a small group, then, pretty much carte blanche, right? We can find something for you anywhere. If you're expecting a large group, so let's say you're expecting 80 people, 90 people for the wedding, that can create some things that you want to think in advance. One is, a lot of times, yes, it's your wedding and they're coming down for the week to spend that special time with you, but a lot of times people want a little bit of a vacation too. So if you have a larger resort, it's going to give people the option where they can where they have a little bit of their own space and do their own thing. But in my thing where I'm thinking of is space for blocking the group. So when you have a small resort but you have a big group, a lot of times what happens is we have to split up the number of categories. So, we might be able to get 10 rooms in your most affordable price point, but then as we go up, it's $100 more, it's $100 more. So if you've got a big group, everybody's paying a different price based on what the category is, when they book, what was available, which can get a little complicated. So when you choose a large resort, then we can often block the number of rooms that we need right up at the front where everybody is the same price.
Yeah. So going back to that must-have list, so if you have a couple of priorities on your must-have list, like free Wi-Fi, or the food is really important to you, or if you need an on-site disco, this is where you'll look at the resorts, and hopefully you'll have a short list, maybe 4 or 5 hotels, so you can go through those and see what they offer.
Yeah, and again, obviously you definitely want to pass the budget test first and the accessibility, flight accessibility test second. But once you've got that, as Taylor mentioned, you go through your list, check them off. And again, you might have a resort that's going to check off 5 of your main options that you really want. And maybe you're going to have one that's only got 3, but maybe the one that's got your 3 options has your most important option, like that disco. So we almost want to say prioritize your priorities.
Yeah, definitely prioritize your priorities at that point.
Yeah, and then hopefully that short list of 4 or 5 resorts or whatever is going to then be narrow down even further, eliminating the ones that just aren't going to work.
Yeah. So at this point,
now,
maybe you have 2 and you're like, oh shoot.
Maybe you have 3, but yeah.
How do I decide even further? So our last idea, or the last thing we would like you to look at, is now we're going to take into consideration the wedding aspect.
Right.
So you might be looking at your wedding budget at this point in time, or seeing what kind of packages they have at the certain resorts.
Yeah.
So the first thing you want to look at is the ceremony option. So what's important to you? Do you need completely private ceremony, or do you want to be right on the beach? Or hey, I don't want to be right on the beach, but I want a nice view. So what kinds of things are important to you for your ceremony, and does that hotel offer them?
Right. And like as Taylor mentioned, and as the slide said, not all resorts offer all ceremony venues. So, most all of them will offer a beach wedding, but it might be a beach wedding in the middle of the chairs with people standing by watching.
Not so private.
So exactly. So if that privacy is a big issue, and we're finding that's more and more, if privacy is a big issue, then maybe you're going to look to see, do they have a rooftop? Do they have like a private beach area? Another thing, exclusivity. Some people, they don't want to be one wedding in 3 that day. They want to be the only wedding that day. So that's a good way to kind of go through that checklist and say, you know what? They only have that main public beach. I don't want that. Let's get rid of that option and narrow it down further. And then if you still have, some choices left, then we would start looking at, as Taylor said, the packages and maybe the reception option. So let's say you have a resort that's great, but the package it offers is only a semi-private dinner and you wanted private. And then there is a second option that offers private. So what we would normally do is say, you know what? With the semi-private, can we upgrade? And if so, what's roughly the cost going to be? So pull that wedding budget out, compare, you know, the two together and say, okay, to get us what we want at property A, you know, roughly we're going to look at this amount. If we're looking at property B, which already gives us what we want, we're going to look at roughly this amount. So hopefully what's going to happen is at the end, you've now funneled everything down and you've got that one property that is perfect for everything and perfect for your wedding.
Yeah, so hopefully you've made a decision after
Yes.
all of those things, so all of those 6 things we wanted you to look at, and you have funneled it down to one.
Yes.
The
spot.
Yay! That would be so exciting. Confetti everywhere.
Yes.
But that's not the end. So next week, or next time, not next
Yes.
week, sorry. Next time, we're going to be talking about actually booking your wedding trip.
Yes.
So after doing all of this, the next step would be booking your wedding trip and making everything official.
Absolutely.
But for right now, I don't think we have any comments or questions. But if you do,
Yes.
please make sure that you're messaging us, whether it's on this Facebook post or you can email us. We'll put up our email addresses soon.
Yes.
Comment, do anything you need to, and then we can talk more about the location.
Absolutely. How to choose your location. Here's our contact details, and thanks everyone for joining us.
Bye!